My name is Marcus, 28 years old, and I've always been the responsible son my parents somehow managed to overlook. For years I watched my sister Brittany get every advantage while I stood in the shadows. When my parents chose to take her on vacation instead of me, I was hurt, but not surprised. What no one expected was the frantic call about her arrest that would finally expose what I'd known all along. Standing in my apartment holding that phone, I felt a twisted mix of validation and concern. If you've ever felt like the unfavorite child in your family, hit that like button and subscribe to see how my sister's true colors were finally revealed. Let me know where you're watching from in the comments. Growing up in suburban Chicago, our family looked normal from the outside. My father Robert worked as an accountant, putting in long hours, especially during tax season, while my mother Helen taught third grade at the local elementary school. We lived in a modest 4-bedroom house with a small backyard where Dad would grill on weekends during summer. On paper, we were the average American family, but inside our home the dynamics were anything but equal. From my earliest memories, the contrast between how my parents treated Brittany and me was painfully obvious. While I was the studious, responsible child who followed rules and rarely caused trouble, Brittany was 3 years younger and seemed to master the art of manipulation before she could properly tie her shoes. She had this way of tilting her head, making her eyes well up with tears, and suddenly whatever rule she'd broken was forgotten. When I was 12 and Brittany was 9, I earned straight As for the entire school year. My parents gave me a quick good job and put my report card on the refrigerator. 2 weeks later, when Brittany brought home a single B+ after getting C's all year, my parents took the entire family out for dinner at the Cheesecake Factory, her favorite restaurant, and bought her a new bike. The message couldn't have been clearer. Her smallest achievements outshined my consistent excellence. For my 16th birthday, after saving for years and researching extensively, I asked for help buying a used car. My parents contributed $300 and told me to keep saving. 6 months later, when Brittany turned 13, they surprised her with a lavish party at an indoor water park resort, inviting 20 of her friends for an overnight stay that must have cost well over $2,000. When I quietly mentioned the disparity, my mother said, "Brittany is more social, Marcus. She needs these experiences." As if I didn't also need to feel valued. The pattern continued through high school. When I was caught breaking curfew by 30 minutes after a study group ran late, I was grounded for 2 weeks. When Brittany was caught sneaking out her window at midnight to meet friends, my parents had a heart-to-heart with her about trust, and she faced no consequences. Their explanation was always some version of, "She's going through a sensitive phase," or "She needs more understanding right now." Despite the obvious favoritism, I channeled my frustration into achievement. I graduated as valedictorian, earned a full scholarship to the University of Illinois for computer science, and maintained a perfect GPA through college. Each accomplishment felt like proof I was worthy, even if my parents seemed more concerned with Brittany's struggle to maintain a C average in community college. After graduation, I landed a job at a respected software company in Chicago, steadily working my way up from junior developer to project lead within 5 years. I bought my own apartment in Lincoln Park, a modest 1-bedroom, but in a great neighborhood and completely mine. Meanwhile, Brittany bounced between jobs as a bartender, retail associate, and receptionist, never sticking with anything longer than 6 months. She lived in our parents' basement between her frequent moves in and out of apartments she couldn't afford. Through years of therapy and self-reflection, I built my self-worth outside of family validation. My therapist helped me understand that my parents' behavior reflected their own issues rather than my value. Still, the emotional scars remained. At family gatherings, I'd watch my parents fuss over Brittany while barely acknowledging my presence. They'd ask endless questions about her latest job or relationship drama, but show only passing interest in my career milestones or personal life. 2 years ago, I met Rachel through a friend's dinner party. Smart, compassionate, and working as a physical therapist, she quickly became the most important person in my life. Rachel noticed the family dynamic immediately after meeting my parents and sister at Thanksgiving dinner. Later that night, she asked how I could remain so calm when my accomplishments were clearly being overlooked. "That's just how it's always been," I told her. "I've accepted it." Rachel encouraged me to maintain relationships with my family, but also to set boundaries. "Your worth isn't determined by their ability to see it," she would remind me. With her support, I developed a cordial but somewhat distant relationship with my parents. We'd meet for dinner once a month, exchange holiday gifts, and maintain the appearance of a close family. I kept conversations light, shared limited details about my life, and lowered my expectations for their interest or approval. Inside, though, I still carried the hurt of the child, who never understood why his sister's tears always mattered more than his achievements. I had built a good life despite their oversight, but the lingering question remained, would they ever truly see me? Last spring, my parents invited Rachel and me to Sunday dinner at their house. This wasn't unusual. We typically joined them once every month or so, enduring a few hours of my mother doting on Brittany while my father nodded along. Rachel squeezed my hand supportively as we pulled into their driveway, our usual signal that we'd get through this together. The house smelled like pot roast, my mother's specialty, and Brittany was already at the table scrolling through her phone while my parents bustled around the kitchen. She barely looked up when we entered, offering a disinterested hey before returning to her screen. At 25, my sister still acted like a teenager, complete with eye-rolling and dramatic sighs when attention wasn't focused on her. Dinner started normally enough. My father asked about my job, nodding without really listening, as I mentioned leading a new project. My mother asked Rachel about her patience, then quickly shifted to telling Brittany how beautiful her new haircut looked. The usual dynamic was firmly in place. As my mother cleared the dinner plates and brought out apple pie for dessert, my father cleared his throat with unusual ceremony. "Your mother and I have some exciting news," he announced, smiling broadly. "We've been saving for years, and we've finally booked that Caribbean cruise we've always talked about." My mother clapped her hands together. 10 days on Royal Caribbean's newest ship. We leave next month. I felt genuinely happy for them. My parents worked hard and they deserved a nice vacation. Rachel and I exchanged glances. Maybe we could offer to watch their house while they were gone. "That's great," I said. "Which islands are you visiting?" My father launched into an enthusiastic description of the itinerary: St. Thomas, St. Martin, Puerto Rico, and the cruise line's private island. As he spoke, I noticed Brittany had a smug smile on her face. "The suite has a balcony," my mother added. "It'll be perfect for the three of us to watch the sunsets." I paused, fork halfway to my mouth. "3." My mother nodded. "Yes, Brittany's coming with us. Won't it be wonderful?" The realization hit me like a physical blow. They hadn't invited me. They were taking my sister on a luxury Caribbean cruise and hadn't even considered including me and Rachel. "Oh," was all I managed to say, setting down my fork as my appetite vanished. Rachel, always perceptive, placed her hand on my knee under the table. "Marcus wouldn't be able to take the time off work anyway," my father said dismissively. "His job keeps him so busy. And Brittany really needs this break," my mother added quickly. "She's been so down since her breakup with Todd." Ah, there it was. Brittany's latest drama taking center stage again. Her 2-month relationship with a guy she met at a bar had ended, and somehow that warranted a Caribbean cruise. Meanwhile, I had recently completed a major project that saved our company millions, a fact I'd mentioned earlier that they'd completely ignored. Brittany finally looked up from her phone. "The shopping in St. Thomas is supposed to be amazing. Mom and I are getting matching swimsuits." She didn't even pretend to be sorry I wasn't included. The rest of the dinner passed in a blur. I smiled mechanically, asked appropriate questions about their travel plans, and declined a second slice of pie. Rachel carried most of the conversation, asking about cruise activities and shore excursions, while I struggled to mask my hurt. On the drive home, the facade crumbled. 10 years, I said, my hands gripping the steering wheel too tightly. 10 years I've been talking about wanting to visit the Caribbean. They know that. They've heard me talk about it since college. "I'm so sorry, Marcus," Rachel said. "That was incredibly thoughtless of them." "Thoughtless implies they didn't think about it," I replied. "They thought about it. They just decided I didn't matter." The next day, I called my best friend Jake and told him what happened. Unlike me, Jake had never learned to filter his reactions. "That's completely messed up," he said immediately. "How can they not see what they're doing? Brittany breaks up with some random dude she dated for 5 minutes, and she gets a cruise. Meanwhile, you've been the perfect son your entire life and get nothing. That's some serious protas." Bullshit. His outrage was validating, but it didn't change anything. I was still excluded, still an afterthought in my own family. Maybe I should say something I considered aloud. Tell them how it made me feel. Would it matter, Jake asked. Would they actually hear you, or would they just make excuses for why poor Brittany needs it more? He had a point. Previous attempts to discuss the favoritism had always been dismissed as sibling rivalry or oversensitivity on my part. Focus on your own life, Jake advised. Plan an even better trip with Rachel. Live well, it's the best revenge. Taking his advice, Rachel and I began researching vacation options for ourselves. We settled on a trip to Colorado later in the summer, hiking mountain cabins and outdoor adventures that suited us far better than a crowded cruise ship anyway. As my parents' departure date approached, I threw myself into work. The project I was leading gained attention from upper management, and my boss hinted at a possible promotion if things continued to go well. I channeled my disappointment into productivity, staying late and volunteering for additional responsibilities. 3 days before my parents and Brittany were scheduled to leave, I stopped by their house to drop off a guidebook for Caribbean ports that Rachel had found. No one answered the front door, so I used my key and left it on the kitchen counter with a note wishing them a good trip. As I was leaving, I heard Brittany's voice from the basement where she'd been living. She was on the phone, her voice carrying clearly up the stairs. I know, right? All I had to do was cry about Todd for like 5 minutes, and now I'm getting a free cruise. Mom and Dad are so easy to play. Meanwhile, Perfect Marcus is stuck at home working like a loser. I quietly left the house, her words confirming what I'd always known, but tried to deny Brittany was fully aware of the favoritism and actively exploited it. That night I told Rachel what I'd overheard. "Aren't you going to confront her?" she asked. I shook my head. What's the point? My parents wouldn't believe me anyway. They never have. Instead of dwelling on it, we finalized our Colorado plans, booking a beautiful cabin near Rocky Mountain National Park. If my family couldn't appreciate me, I would focus on the people who did. With my parents and Brittany off on their Caribbean adventure, Rachel and I threw ourselves into planning our Colorado trip. We researched hiking trails in Rocky Mountain National Park, found a cozy cabin with stunning mountain views, and created a detailed itinerary for our week-long getaway scheduled for August. "This is going to be so much better than being trapped on a cruise ship," Rachel said as we pored over trail maps one evening. Fresh mountain air, gorgeous scenery, and no gift shop pressure. I had to agree. The more we planned, the less I dwelled on my parents' exclusion. Their trip was exactly the kind of structured touristy vacation that would have my sister complaining about boredom by day 3 anyway. At work, things were going exceptionally well. The project I was leading had caught the attention of the company's executive team, and my boss called me into his office to discuss future opportunities. "The VP of Product Development mentioned your name specifically," he told me. "Keep this between us for now, but there might be a senior management position opening up in the fall. If you're interested, I'd be happy to recommend you." This was exactly the career advancement I'd been working toward. Between this professional recognition and my solid relationship with Rachel, I had plenty of reasons to feel good about my life, regardless of my family's oversight. 3 days into my parents' cruise, I was working late at the office when my phone rang. Seeing my father's name on the screen was surprising. International calls from cruise ships were expensive, and my parents were typically too frugal for such indulgences. "Dad," I answered, "is everything okay?" The background noise was chaotic voices, announcements, what sounded like a busy public space. My father's voice came through strained and tired. "Marcus, we have a situation here." His voice cracked slightly. "We need your help." An immediate surge of concern pushed aside any lingering resentment. "What's wrong? Are you and Mom okay?" "We're fine, physically at least." He paused, and I could hear my mother's voice in the background, though I couldn't make out her words. "It's Brittany. She's been arrested." I sat back in my office chair, momentarily speechless. Whatever I had expected, it wasn't this. "Arrested for what?" My father sighed heavily. "Disorderly conduct, property damage, and assault. She had too much to drink at one of the island bars and got into an altercation with another passenger. Then she damaged some property at the hotel when security tried to escort her back to our room." "Where are you now?" I asked, already opening my laptop to search flights. We're in St. Thomas. The cruise ship left without us, since we couldn't get this resolved before departure. We're staying at a hotel near the port while we figure this out. I could hear the exhaustion and embarrassment in my father's voice. Part of me, a small hurt part I wasn't proud of, felt a surge of vindication. The golden child had finally shown her true colors in a way my parents couldn't ignore or excuse away. But the larger part of me recognized my family was in trouble and needed help. She's being held at the local police station, my father continued. The bail is substantial, and there are hotel damages to pay for. We're completely overwhelmed, Marcus. We don't know what to do. What about your travel insurance? I asked, trying to think practically. It covers medical emergencies, not bail for criminal charges, he replied. And we're not even sure how to navigate the legal system here. Everything's different, and nobody seems interested in helping American tourists who caused problems. I took a deep breath, weighing my options. I could tell them this was their problem to solve. After all, they'd chosen to take Brittany instead of me. But even as the thought crossed my mind, I knew I wouldn't do that. Despite everything, they were still my family. Okay, I said finally. I'll see what flights are available. Text me the details of where you're staying and the contact information for the police station. I'll be there as soon as I can. The relief in my father's voice was palpable. Thank you, son. I'm sorry to ask this of you, but we didn't know who else to call. After hanging up, I sat in my darkened office processing what had just happened. The irony wasn't lost on me, excluded from the vacation, but suddenly essential when crisis struck. When I called Rachel to explain the situation, her initial reaction mirrored my conflicted feelings. They exclude you from their fancy vacation but expect you to drop everything and rescue them when Brittany messes up. Her frustration on my behalf was evident. Part of me wants to tell you to let them handle their own problems. I considered it, I admitted. But I can't just leave them stranded there. Rachel was quiet for a moment. That's why I love you. Even after everything, you're still willing to help. She paused. Just be careful not to fall back into old patterns. Don't let them take advantage of your kindness again. I won't, I promised. This time will be different. Finding a last-minute flight to St. Thomas wasn't easy, and it certainly wasn't cheap. The only available option was a red-eye with a connection in Miami that would cost nearly $2,000. I booked it without hesitation, emailed my boss explaining the family emergency, and packed a small suitcase. As I prepared to leave my apartment, I caught my reflection in the hallway mirror. The irony of spending thousands of dollars to join a vacation I'd been excluded from wasn't lost on me. But perhaps this unexpected crisis would finally force my parents to see what had been in front of them all along. The flight to St. Thomas was long and uncomfortable. After a sleepless night on the plane and a rushed connection in Miami, I finally arrived at Cyril E. King Airport on St. Thomas around noon the next day. Stepping off the plane into the humid Caribbean air, I was struck by the cruel irony. My first tropical vacation was unfolding under the worst possible circumstances. Under different conditions, I would have appreciated the stunning landscape. St. Thomas was genuinely beautiful, lush green hills rising dramatically from turquoise waters, colorful buildings dotting the harbor, palm trees swaying in the gentle breeze, the island paradise my parents had chosen to share with Brittany. But not me was now the backdrop for a family crisis only I could apparently solve. A taxi took me from the airport to the waterfront hotel where my parents had relocated after the cruise ship departed without them. The hotel was a mid-range property with faded tropical decor and an exhausted-looking staff. Not exactly the luxury vacation my parents had planned. I found them sitting dejectedly in the hotel lobby, two figures who suddenly looked much older than when I'd seen them just a week ago. My mother's eyes were red-rimmed from crying, and my father's normally perfect posture was bent with worry. They didn't notice me until I was standing directly in front of them. Marcus. My mother jumped up and embraced me, something she rarely did. Thank God you're here. My father stood more slowly, extending his hand for a handshake, before apparently thinking better of it and pulling me into an awkward hug. Thank you for coming, son. We didn't know what else to do. We moved to a quiet corner of the lobby, where they could fill me in on the details. The story was worse than I'd initially understood. It started 2 days ago, my father explained. We had docked in St. Thomas for the day. Your mother and I wanted to visit the historical sites, but Brittany insisted on going to a beach bar she'd read about. We should have stayed together, my mother interjected, dabbing at her eyes with a crumpled tissue. But she's 25, and we thought she'd be fine on her own for a few hours. According to their account, Brittany had started drinking shortly after arriving at the beach bar. By mid-afternoon, she was visibly intoxicated and got into an argument with another cruise passenger over a chair. The argument escalated until Brittany threw the woman's phone into the ocean. The ship's security got involved at that point, my father continued. They brought her back to the cruise ship and confined her to our cabin. We thought that would be the end of it, an embarrassing incident, but nothing more. But it wasn't the end. Later that evening, after my parents had gone to sleep, Brittany sneaked out of their cabin and made her way to the ship's nightclub. Already on the security staff's radar, she was cut off at the bar after trying to order more drinks. This led to another confrontation. She caused a scene, my mother said quietly, screaming, knocking over tables. When security tried to escort her out, she trailed off, unable to continue. She hit one of the security officers, my father finished, scratched his face and broke his glasses. That's when the ship's captain decided to involve local authorities. The cruise line has a zero-tolerance policy for assaulting staff. By the time they docked the next morning, the ship's security had contacted St. Thomas police. Officers were waiting to take Brittany into custody. The cruise line informed my parents they could either disembark with Brittany or continue the cruise without her. Naturally, they chose to stay with their daughter. The ship left yesterday afternoon, my father said. We've been dealing with the police and trying to figure out what to do since then. In addition to the assault charge, Brittany was facing charges for property damage to the cruise ship and disorderly conduct. The cruise line was also threatening civil action for damages and the disruption to their operations. Have you spoken with her? I asked. My parents exchanged glances. Briefly, when they allowed us to see her yesterday, my mother said. She was still, not herself, angry, blaming everyone else. What about a lawyer? We contacted the American consulate, my father replied. They provided a list of local attorneys, but most want retainers of several $1,000s before they'll even meet with us. I nodded, taking it all in. And the hotel you mentioned, damages. My father winced. After we checked in here, Brittany had some sort of meltdown in the hotel lobby, broke a glass table and damaged a computer at the front desk. The hotel manager says we're responsible for almost $3,000 in damages, and they're considering pressing additional charges. It was worse than I'd imagined. My sister hadn't just had a momentary lapse in judgment, she'd embarked on a destructive spree that spanned multiple locations and involved multiple victims. Looking at my parents, I noticed something I'd never seen before. They looked defeated. For the first time in my memory, they weren't making excuses for Brittany or trying to minimize her behavior. They were simply overwhelmed by the consequences of years of enabling her. I'll handle this, I said with more confidence than I felt. First, I need to understand exactly what charges we're dealing with and what options we have. My first stop was the police station, a small worn building near the harbor. Inside, the air conditioning was struggling against the tropical heat, and several officers moved unhurriedly between desks. I approached the front desk and explained I was there about Brittany. The officer directed me to speak with Officer Dawson, a heavy-set man with a weathered face that suggested decades of service. You're the brother, he asked when I introduced myself. Yes, I just arrived from Chicago to help sort this out. Officer Dawson leaned back in his chair. Your sister's got herself in quite a situation. Assault on security personnel is serious business, especially in a tourist economy like ours. The cruise lines have a lot of influence here. I understand, I said. Can you tell me exactly what charges she's facing and what options we have? He pulled out a file and flipped it open. Disorderly conduct, destruction of property, and assault. Bail's been set at $5,000, but even if you pay that, she can't leave the island until this is resolved. She'll need to appear in court next week. As we discussed the details, Officer Dawson let something slip that caught my attention. Not her first rodeo with law enforcement, is it? He remarked casually. I paused. What do you mean? He looked up, realizing he'd said something I didn't know. Oh, I assumed you were aware. When we processed her, her record came up. She has prior arrests in Illinois, 2 DUIs and a disorderly conduct charge from last year. All plead down to minimal consequences. The revelation hit me like a physical blow. Brittany had a criminal record. How had I not known about this? More importantly, how had my parents kept this from me? After finishing with Officer Dawson, I headed to the hotel management office to discuss the property damage situation. The manager, Mr. Reynolds, was initially cold and unwilling to negotiate. "We have a zero-tolerance policy for guests who damage our property," he stated firmly. "We're well within our rights to press charges in addition to demanding payment for repairs." I took a different approach than my panicked parents likely had. "Mr. Reynolds, I completely understand your position. My sister's behavior was inexcusable and my family takes full responsibility. What happened here was not representative of who we are, and we're prepared to make this right financially. Is there a way we can resolve this without additional legal proceedings?" My calm, professional demeanor seemed to ease his hostility. After some discussion, he agreed to accept payment for damages, without pressing additional charges, provided we settled the bill immediately and ensured Brittany wouldn't return to the property. With a better understanding of the situation, I returned to my parents at the hotel. It was time for some difficult conversations, not just about Brittany's current predicament, but about the patterns that had led us here. The next morning, I took a taxi to the St. Thomas police station alone. My parents had wanted to come, but I insisted on meeting with Brittany by myself first. After checking in with the front desk and surrendering my ID, I was led to a small windowless room with a metal table and 2 chairs. 5 minutes later, the door opened, and Brittany entered escorted by a female officer. My sister looked nothing like the confident, always put-together person I knew. Her hair was unwashed, her eyes bloodshot, and the tropical tan she'd been working on was now patchy and peeling. The bright orange jumpsuit did nothing for her complexion. The officer removed her handcuffs and left us alone, explaining she'd be right outside the door. "Well, look who's here to save the day," Brittany said, her voice hoarse but still dripping with sarcasm. "St. Marcus swoops in to rescue everyone. I didn't take the bait. How are you holding up?" She rolled her eyes. "How does it look like I'm holding up? I'm in jail in some third-world island. The food is disgusting, and I haven't had a decent shower in days. St. Thomas is part of the U.S. Virgin Islands, not a third-world country," I corrected her automatically. "And you're lucky the charges aren't worse." She glared at me. "Are you here to lecture me or help me? Because Mom and Dad said you were coming to get me out." I leaned forward, making direct eye contact. "I'm here to help, but getting you out isn't as simple as paying bail. You're facing serious charges, Brittany. Assault, property damage, disorderly conduct, and according to the police, these aren't your first offenses." Her expression flickered briefly before hardening again. "Those other things were misunderstandings, and Mom and Dad took care of them." "Like they've taken care of everything your entire life," I said quietly. "But they can't fix this one with a teary conversation and a checkbook. The cruise line wants to press charges. The hotel wants thousands in damages. And you can't leave the island until you appear in court next week. So what's the plan? You must have a plan since everyone thinks you're so perfect." The bitterness in her voice was palpable. I sighed. "I'm working on it, but first I need to understand exactly what happened, the truth, not whatever edited version you told Mom and Dad. They told you everything already, I'm sure. They told me what they know. I suspect that's not the whole story." Brittany crossed her arms defensively. "What's that supposed to mean?" "It means Officer Dawson mentioned your previous arrests. The ones Mom and Dad apparently handled so quietly, I never even knew about them. 2 DUIs and disorderly conduct. When did all that happen?" For the first time, Brittany looked genuinely uncomfortable. "That's none of your business." "It became my business when I flew 2,000 miles to help clean up this mess I countered. What else don't I know, Brittany? What else have you been hiding while Mom and Dad bend over backward to protect you?" Something in my tone must have gotten through to her because her defiant posture suddenly collapsed. She rubbed her face with both hands, a gesture that reminded me of when we were children, and she was caught in a lie. The first DUI was 3 years ago, she admitted quietly. I was driving home from a party and got pulled over. My blood alcohol was twice the legal limit. Dad hired a lawyer who got it reduced to reckless driving. I had to pay a fine and take some classes. And the second, last year. Similar situation, but I clipped a parked car. No one was hurt, she added quickly. Mom and Dad paid for the damages privately so the other car owner wouldn't press charges. My license was suspended for 3 months. The disorderly conduct. She looked away. Got into a fight with a bouncer at a club when he cut me off. It's not as bad as it sounds. I sat back processing this information. While I'd been building my career and relationship believing my sister was just immature and spoiled, she'd actually been spiraling into dangerous behavior patterns that could have killed someone. Why, I asked simply. Why risk so much? Why put Mom and Dad through this? Brittany laughed bitterly. Put them through what writing checks to make problems go away. That's all they've ever done. It's easier for them than actually parenting. That doesn't answer my question. She was quiet for a long moment. I don't know, she finally admitted, her voice smaller than I'd heard it in years. It's like I can't stop myself sometimes. I get angry or frustrated, and then I drink, and everything gets worse. Does this happen often? The drinking and losing control? Her silence was answer enough. How long have you been manipulating Mom and Dad? I asked. Her head snapped up. What? I overheard you on the phone before you left, bragging about how you cried about your breakup for 5 minutes and scored a free cruise. How you played them. A flush crept up her neck. I was just talking big for my friends. No, you weren't. You've been doing this our whole lives, Brittany, making them think you're always the victim, always in crisis, always needing special treatment. Like you're so perfect, she spat. Mr. Straight A student, Mr. Perfect Job, Mr. Perfect girlfriend. You're enjoying this, aren't you? Seeing me fail, finally getting to be the favorite child. I shook my head. I don't want to be the favorite. I just wanted to be treated equally. And no, I'm not enjoying seeing you like this. You're my sister. Then why are you interrogating me instead of helping me? Because I can't help you if you won't be honest with me or yourself. This isn't just about a bad night on vacation. This is a pattern, and it's going to keep getting worse unless something changes. Brittany's eyes filled with tears, but unlike the calculated crying I'd witnessed countless times, these seemed genuine. I don't know how to change, she whispered. I don't know how to be like you. I'm not asking you to be like me. I'm asking you to take responsibility for once in your life, to face consequences instead of letting Mom and Dad shield you from them, to get help if you need it. She wiped at her eyes with the sleeve of her jumpsuit. Are you going to help me get out of here or not? I will, I promised, but on one condition. When we go back home, you get professional help. Real help, not just Mom and Dad throwing money at the problem. And you tell them everything, all the arrests, all the times you manipulated them, all of it. She stared at me for a long moment, calculation visible in her eyes. I could almost see her weighing whether she could find another way out of this situation. Finally, she nodded. Fine. Deal. Just get me out of this place. I wasn't entirely convinced of her sincerity, but it was a start. I'll work on the bail and talk to the lawyers. But Brittany, this is your last chance. If you don't follow through, I'm done covering for you. After leaving the police station, I returned to the hotel where my parents were anxiously waiting. The time had come for an equally difficult conversation with them. They bombarded me with questions as soon as I walked into their room. How is she? Is she okay? What did she say? Can we get her out? My mother's words tumbled over each other. She's physically fine, I assured them. But we need to talk about some things before we move forward. What things? My father asked warily. I took a deep breath. I know about Brittany's previous arrests, the DUIs, the disorderly conduct charge, all of it. My parents exchanged alarmed glances. How did you find out about that? My father asked. The police mentioned her record. Brittany filled in the details. I looked between them. Why didn't you tell me? My mother twisted her hands in her lap. We handled it privately. There was no need to involve you or damage her reputation. Her reputation, I repeated. Mom, she could have killed someone driving drunk. Twice. And instead of getting her real help, you hired lawyers and paid people off. We did what any parents would do, my father defended, though his voice lacked conviction. No, I countered firmly. What most parents would do is make sure their child faces appropriate consequences, so they learn from their mistakes. What you did was teach Brittany that she never has to take responsibility for her actions. My mother's eyes filled with tears. That's not fair, Marcus. Isn't it? Think about it. Her entire life, you've bailed her out of every problem, excused every bad decision, rewarded her for the smallest effort, while ignoring my accomplishments. And look where it's led. She's sitting in a jail cell in the Caribbean, facing charges that could follow her for life. My father's face flushed with anger, then drained to a pale resignation. He sank down onto the edge of the bed. I didn't realize, he said quietly. We thought we were helping her. You weren't, I said, softening my tone. You were protecting yourselves from having to acknowledge that your parenting approach was hurting her, not helping. My mother wiped at her tears. We never meant to hurt either of you. I know that, I acknowledged, but intentions don't change outcomes. And the outcome here is that Brittany has serious problems that need addressing beyond just getting her out of this immediate situation. For the first time in my adult life, I saw my father look truly defeated. We've made a mess of things, haven't we? It's not too late to fix it, I offered, but it has to start now. No more enabling, no more excuses. Brittany needs real consequences and real help. My mother nodded slowly. What do we do? First, we deal with the legal issues here. Then when we get home, Brittany gets professional help, therapy, possibly addiction counseling. And you both need to establish boundaries. No more living in your basement rent-free. No more bailing her out financially or legally. My father looked up at me with an expression I'd never seen before, respect. When did you become so wise? When I had to figure out how to validate myself because you two were too busy with Brittany, I replied honestly. The hurt in his eyes was real, but so was the dawning recognition. I'm sorry, son. I never saw it that way before. I know, I said simply. My mother moved to sit beside me on the small sofa. Can you forgive us? I'm working on it, I answered truthfully. But right now we need to focus on helping Brittany in the right way. Are you both willing to do that? Even when it's hard. Even when she tries to manipulate you. They exchanged glances, then nodded in unison. We'll try, my father promised. We'll do better. For both of you. It wasn't a perfect resolution, but it was a start. For the first time, I felt like my parents were truly seeing me, and also truly seeing the damage their favoritism had caused. The next morning, I met with a local attorney recommended by the American consulate. Jeffrey Williams was a transplant from New York who had been practicing law in the U.S. Virgin Islands for 15 years. His office was a small space above a dive shop near the harbor, with windows that let in the sea breeze and distant sound of boat horns. Your sister has managed to create quite a legal tangle, he remarked after reviewing the police reports and charges. The good news is that nobody was seriously injured. The bad news is that the cruise line is pushing hard for maximum penalties to make an example of her. What are our options, I asked. Given that this is her first offense in this jurisdiction, we could potentially negotiate a plea deal, he explained. She'd have to plead guilty to lesser charges, pay restitution for all damages, possibly perform community service, and agree to some form of rehabilitation program. And if we fight the charges? Attorney Williams shook his head. I wouldn't recommend it. There are multiple witnesses, including security personnel and other passengers. If this goes to trial, she's looking at potential jail time. After discussing the financial aspects, his retainer fee was substantial but not unreasonable given the circumstances. I hired him on the spot. With my parents' authorization, I withdrew funds from their emergency savings account to cover the retainer and Brittany's bail. By mid-afternoon, I had posted bail and negotiated with the court to allow Brittany to stay at our hotel while awaiting her hearing with strict conditions that she not leave the property without supervision or consume any alcohol. When I brought her back to the hotel, my parents rushed to embrace her, but I noticed something different in their manner. The usual blind relief and immediate forgiveness were tempered with a new wariness. Our conversation had made an impact. Brittany, for her part, seemed subdued. Whether from the reality of her situation or simply from the discomfort of her brief incarceration, she wasn't immediately falling back into her usual patterns of deflection and manipulation. With Attorney Williams's guidance, I next approached the hotel management about the property damage. Mr. Reynolds, the manager, had initially been firm about pressing charges, but after a candid conversation about Brittany's willingness to take responsibility and our immediate payment for damages, he reluctantly agreed to drop potential charges. "This is a one-time courtesy," he emphasized. "Your sister is not welcome back at this property in the future." The cruise line proved more challenging. Their legal department was headquartered in Miami and had strict protocols for passenger misconduct. After several conference calls, Attorney Williams managed to negotiate a settlement. Brittany would make a formal written apology, pay for all damages, including the security officer's medical examination and replacement glasses, and agree to a 5-year ban from the cruise line. In exchange, they would support reduced charges with the local prosecutor. Throughout these negotiations, I insisted that Brittany be present and actively participate. No more hiding behind our parents or letting others clean up her messes. She needed to hear directly how her actions had affected others and the effort required to mitigate the consequences. "I never realized how much work goes into fixing these situations," she admitted quietly after a particularly grueling conference call with the cruise line representatives. "That's because Mom and Dad usually handled everything behind the scenes," I pointed out. "This is what taking responsibility actually looks like." The court hearing was scheduled for the following Tuesday, giving us 5 days to prepare. Attorney Williams coached Brittany on appropriate courtroom behavior, what to say when addressed by the judge, and the importance of expressing genuine remorse. During this time, I also had Attorney Williams draw up a formal agreement for Brittany to sign outlining the conditions of our family's support going forward: mandatory therapy, substance abuse, evaluation, financial independence within 6 months, and no further legal incidents. My parents initially balked at the formality of the document. "Is this really necessary?" my mother asked. "She's our daughter, not a business contract." "It's necessary, because verbal promises haven't worked before," I explained. "This makes the expectations crystal clear for everyone." To my surprise, Brittany signed without protest. "I get it," she said. "You don't trust me. I haven't earned that yet." It was the most self-aware statement I'd heard from my sister in years. The evening before the court hearing, I arranged for us to have dinner at a small restaurant near our hotel. Despite the circumstances, it was the first time in memory that my entire family was together in a vacation destination. The irony wasn't lost on any of us. As we sat overlooking the harbor, watching the sunset paint the sky in vibrant oranges and pinks, my father cleared his throat. "I want to say something," he began, uncharacteristically hesitant. "These past few days have been eye-opening for your mother and me." My mother nodded in agreement, reaching for his hand. "Marcus," he continued, "watching you handle this situation, the way you've navigated the legal issues negotiated with the hotel and cruise line, even how you've been firm but fair with Brittany, it's made me realize how much we've underestimated you all these years." I wasn't sure how to respond. After a lifetime of seeking this recognition, hearing it now felt simultaneously validating and strange. "I just did what needed to be done," I said, finally. "That's just it," my father insisted. "You always have. You've always been the responsible one, the one we could count on. And because of that, we took you for granted. We focused all our attention on Brittany because she was the squeaky wheel, and in doing so, we failed to appreciate the man you've become despite our oversight." My mother's eyes filled with tears. "We've been blind, Marcus. So blind to how our actions affected both of you. Can you ever forgive us?" Before I could answer, Brittany spoke up. "I need to apologize too." She looked directly at me, something she rarely did during serious conversations. "I've always been jealous of you, you know. How everything seems to come so easily to you, school-career relationships. It made me feel better to see Mom and Dad fawning over me instead of you. I liked being the favorite, even though I knew it wasn't fair." Her honesty caught me off guard. Nothing came easily. I corrected her. "I worked hard for everything I've achieved. The difference is that I never expected anyone to fix my problems or hand me success." She nodded. "I know that now, and I'm going to try to change. Really try, not just say it this time." "That's all any of us can do," I said. "Try to be better moving forward." The court hearing the next day went as well as could be expected. Brittany pled guilty to reduced charges of simple assault and minor property damage. The judge sentenced her to a fine of $2,000, 40 hours of community service to be completed upon return to Illinois, and mandatory enrollment in an alcohol education program. Most importantly, she was allowed to leave the island with us once all financial obligations were settled. The entire legal ordeal had cost my parents over $15,000 between bail attorney fees, court costs, and restitution payments, a steep price for a vacation gone wrong. As we prepared to fly home the next day, I received a call from Rachel. "How are you holding up?" she asked. "Exhausted but okay," I replied honestly. "It's been intense." "I miss you," she said. "This wasn't how either of us planned to spend this week." An idea struck me. "Why don't you join us? There's still 3 days before we fly home. The legal mess is sorted, and it might be nice to actually enjoy this place a little." "Are you sure? With your family situation?" "I'm sure. Things are different now. Better, I think. And I'd like you to see it." To my delight, Rachel found a last-minute flight arriving the next morning. When my parents heard she was coming, they insisted on upgrading her to a better room than I'd booked and covering all her expenses. "It's the least we can do," my father said. "After everything you've done for us, we want to meet the woman who's been supporting you all this time." When Rachel arrived, my parents embraced her warmly. Not the polite, distant greeting they'd given her in the past, but a genuine welcome. My mother linked arms with her as we walked along the beach, asking thoughtful questions about her work and interests. My father offered to take us on a sailing excursion he'd researched, making sure to include Rachel in all the planning. For the first time, I felt fully seen and valued by my family. It wasn't just about being appreciated for solving their crisis. It was about being recognized for who I was as a person with a relationship worthy of their interest and respect. As we stood on the deck of a catamaran watching the Caribbean waters glitter in the sunshine, Rachel squeezed my hand. "This isn't how I expected your family drama to play out," she whispered. "Me neither," I admitted. "But maybe sometimes things have to break before they can be rebuilt correctly." 3 months after our unexpected family drama in the Caribbean, I arrived at my parents' house for our now regular Sunday dinner. These gatherings had once been obligations I endured with gritted teeth, but they'd transformed into something I genuinely looked forward to. As I pulled into the driveway, I noticed Brittany's car already parked outside. She was living in an apartment now, a modest one-bedroom she'd found after my parents finally enforced the deadline for her to move out of their basement. She'd been working consistently at a local marketing firm for 2 months, her longest stretch of stable employment in years. Inside, the atmosphere was noticeably different from the family dinners of the past. My mother was in the kitchen with Rachel, the two of them laughing as they prepared a salad together. My father and Brittany were setting the table, engaged in a conversation about her recent promotion to junior account coordinator. Marcus, my father, called when he spotted me. Just in time. We were about to open a bottle of sparkling cider to celebrate Brittany's 2-month sobriety milestone. Brittany gave a small, embarrassed smile. "It's not a big deal." "It is a big deal," I countered, giving her a quick side hug. "I'm proud of you." And I genuinely was. After returning from St. Thomas, Brittany had followed through on our agreement. She'd enrolled in an intensive outpatient program for alcohol abuse, started seeing a therapist twice weekly, and attended regular AA meetings. There had been struggles a week where she stopped answering calls a night, when she almost relapsed after a difficult day at work. But she was making real effort for perhaps the first time in her life. My parents, too, were working to change long-established patterns. They'd started seeing a family therapist who was helping them understand how their enabling behavior had contributed to Brittany's issues and how their differential treatment had affected both of us. They weren't perfect. Old habits occasionally surfaced, but they caught themselves more quickly now. Over dinner, the conversation flowed naturally between all of us, a stark contrast to the old dynamic where Brittany dominated attention while I sat in silence. "So my father said, as we finished dessert, your mother and I have been thinking about planning another family vacation. I tensed slightly, memories of the exclusion still fresh despite the progress we'd made. We were thinking Colorado this time. My mother continued, looking directly at me. Maybe you could help us plan it, Marcus. You and Rachel researched it so thoroughly for your trip that never happened. We'd want both of you to come, my father added quickly. And Rachel too, of course. A proper family vacation. The simple acknowledgement that a family vacation should include the entire family meant more than they could know. I'd like that, I said sincerely. Brittany nodded. Me too, though maybe somewhere without so many bars and opportunities for legal trouble. Her self-deprecating joke broke any remaining tension, and we all laughed. Later that evening, as Rachel and I drove home, she commented on the change. They're really trying, aren't they? They are, I agreed. It's still strange sometimes having them actually listen when I speak, ask about my work, remember things I've told them. Do you think it will last? She asked. I considered the question. I think so. Not perfectly, but meaningfully. The crisis forced them to see things they'd been avoiding for years, and Brittany's doing the work too, which makes a huge difference. That night I called Jake to update him on the latest developments. My best friend had been skeptical about the family transformation, warning me not to get my hopes up too quickly. So, they're actually following through, he asked, surprise evident in his voice. Even Brittany? Even Brittany, I confirmed. She's been sober for 2 months, has her own place, and hasn't asked our parents for money once since we got back. And your parents? They're treating you differently. Like I'm a full member of the family, not just an afterthought. Dad called yesterday just to ask my advice about investing in a new mutual fund. Mom sends me articles related to my work. Small things, but they add up. I'm happy for you, man, Jake said. Just be careful. People don't change overnight. It wasn't overnight, I reminded him. It took 28 years and a Caribbean arrest to get here. We both laughed, but his caution wasn't entirely misplaced. There were still moments when old patterns threatened to resurface: a missed birthday card, an excessive reaction to one of Brittany's minor accomplishments, a thoughtless comment comparing us. The difference was that now these incidents were exceptions rather than the rule, and often quickly recognized and corrected. The most profound change wasn't in my parents or Brittany, but in myself. For years I'd defined my worth in opposition to how my family treated me, proving my value through achievements they barely noticed, building a life they paid little attention to. I'd carried a constant undercurrent of resentment, a need to prove myself that colored even my proudest moments. That burden had lightened. I no longer felt I needed to achieve to be worthy of love or attention. My accomplishments were still important to me, but they were no longer desperate attempts to be seen. The promotion I received the month after returning from St. Thomas felt satisfying for its own sake, not as a statement to my family. My relationship with Rachel deepened as well. Without the constant background stress of family tension, I found myself more present, more capable of vulnerability. We began talking seriously about our future together, moving in eventually marriage. One evening, about 4 months after the St. Thomas incident, my father called and asked if I could meet him for lunch the next day, just the two of us. We met at a small deli near my office. I've been doing a lot of thinking, he said after we'd ordered. About you, about our relationship over the years. I nodded, waiting for him to continue. I realized something recently. I always thought of you as the child who didn't need me. You were so capable, so self-sufficient from such a young age. Brittany was always in crisis, always needing guidance or rescue. It made me feel necessary, important. He looked down at his hands. I think subconsciously I liked feeling needed. And I didn't make you feel needed, I surmised. Number. But that was my failing, not yours. Instead of recognizing your independence as a strength to be proud of, I took it as a reason to focus elsewhere. He looked up at me, his eyes glistening slightly. I missed so much, Marcus. Your achievements, your struggles, the man you were becoming. I'll never get those years back, and I'm so sorry for that. The simple, heartfelt apology meant more than any grand gesture could have. Thank you for saying that, I said quietly. I can't change the past, he continued. But I want you to know how proud I am of you, not just for helping us in St. Thomas, but for everything, the career you've built, the relationship you've cultivated with Rachel, the person you are despite our shortcomings as parents. It was the acknowledgement I'd been seeking my entire life. And yet somehow I realized I no longer needed it quite as desperately as I once had. I appreciate that, Dad. I really do. As we ate our sandwiches, our conversation shifted to everyday topics, work projects, sports plans for the weekend. Simple, normal father-son conversation. It struck me that this ordinary interaction, free from the weight of past resentments, was perhaps the greatest gift of our family's transformation. 5 months after St. Thomas, Brittany reached out to me directly, asking if we could meet for coffee. She looked healthier than I'd seen her in years, clear-eyed, well-rested present. "I wanted to thank you," she said after we'd settled at a small table, "not just for helping with the legal mess, but for forcing me to face reality. You're doing the work I pointed out. That's all you." She shook her head. "I wouldn't have started without that push, and I wanted to apologize again more directly. I knew what was happening all those years, how differently they treated us. I exploited it because it was easier than actually dealing with my issues." Her honesty was refreshing. "We can't change the past," I said, echoing my father's words. "But we can build something better going forward." "That's what my therapist says too," she replied with a small smile. "One day at a time, or whatever." Building a new relationship with Brittany was still a work in progress. There were years of competition and resentment to overcome, but for the first time it felt possible that we might eventually develop a genuine sibling bond based on mutual respect rather than rivalry. As the months passed, our family continued to evolve. There were setbacks: a week when Brittany stopped attending meetings and became distant, an argument when my mother slipped into old patterns of making excuses for her. But these were temporary backward slides in an overall forward progression. The family vacation to Colorado finally happened 6 months after the St. Thomas disaster. We rented a cabin near Rocky Mountain National Park, all of us together, including Rachel. We hiked, played board games, took photos at scenic overlooks, and enjoyed meals without the undercurrent of tension that had characterized our gatherings for so long. Watching the sunset from the cabin's deck one evening, Rachel leaned against my shoulder. "Who would have thought that your sister getting arrested would be the best thing to happen to your family?" I laughed. "Definitely not how I would have chosen to fix things, but I'm grateful it worked out this way." "Your sister seems to be doing well," she observed. "One day at a time," I replied. "All of us, really." And that was the truth of it. Our family's healing wasn't a single moment of revelation, but a daily practice of new patterns and conscious choices. The old dynamics sometimes resurfaced, but we were all more aware now, more willing to acknowledge and correct course. I no longer needed to be the perfect son to prove my worth. My parents no longer enabled Brittany's worst tendencies out of misguided protection. Brittany was learning to stand on her own without manipulation. We were all slowly but surely becoming a healthier family. The crisis that had seemed like the worst possible vacation outcome had ultimately given us something invaluable: the opportunity to break destructive patterns and build something authentic in their place. Our family wasn't perfect. No family is. But we were finally seeing each other clearly with all our flaws and strengths and choosing to love each other anyway. That, I realized, was what family should have been, all along. Have you ever experienced favoritism in your family? How did you handle it? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe to hear more real-life experiences. Sometimes the most painful situations lead to the most meaningful growth. Thank you for listening to my story, and I hope it helps anyone going through similar family struggles to know that healing is possible even after years of hurt. Share this with someone who might need to hear that family dynamics can change for the better.